Week 5, Lesson 1, Multiple Representations. Our learning target for this lesson is I can summarize how additive and multiplicative relationships look in equations, tables, and graphs. Let's review a few things before we begin. An independent variable. Remember that an independent variable is the x value in the equation. It's the input. The dependent variable is the y value in an equation. It's the output. On a table, our independent variables are always on the left, and our dependent variables are always on the right. For our graphs, our independent variables are always on the x-axis, and our dependent variables are always on the y-axis. What is a multiplicative relationship and what is an additive relationship? Remember, a multiplicative relationship includes equations involving multiplication and division. A multiplicative relationship can be described by the equation y equals ax. Y represents the output, or the dependent variable. X represents the input, or the independent variable. And A is going to represent the multiplier, what the number is being multiplied by. The A value will always remain constant in order to be considered a multiplicative relationship. So if we take a look at this table, this is an example of a multiplicative relationship. We need to figure out how to get from x to y. So we need to look at what is the process. So how are we going to get from 2 to 8? I want you to take a moment and think about how can we get from 2 to 8? Now remember, this is a multiplicative relationship, so we're looking at multiplication or division. We can get from 2 to 8 by multiplying by 4. So 2 times 4 would give us 8, but let's check the rest of our table to make sure that works. 3 times 4 does give us 12, 4 times 4 gives us 16, 5 times 4 will give us 20, and 6 times 4 will give us 24. So the process is multiplying by 4. So if we converted this table into an equation, remember y equals ax, we would know that y equals 4 times x. So y equals 4x. Let's look at another one. Remember, we're still doing multiplicative. So what do you think the process is to get from x to y? To get from x to y, we would multiply by 6. 0 times 6 is 0. 1 times 6 is 6. 2 times 6 is 12. 3 times 6 is 18. And 4 times 6 is 24. The equation for our table is going to be y equals 6x because we're multiplying each x value by 6 to get our y. So let's look at an example of a multiplicative relationship in multiple representations. So if we look at our situation, at Starbucks, each carton can hold 3 muffins. So our equation would be y equals 3x. 3 being the muffins that each carton holds, and x would be the number of cartons. So if we wanted to create a table, we could fill in any number of cartons and put in the number of muffins. So cartons, if we had 1 carton, we would get 3 muffins. because we would input a 1 right here where the x is. So it would be 3 times 1 would give us 3. The same thing for 2. 3 times 2 would give us 6, and so on for the rest of the table. Now let's convert this information from a table into a graph. So we still have the same situation, we still have the same values and the same equation. So let's look at a graph. We know that our x values go on the x-axis, so number of cartons, and our y values, our number of muffins, goes on the y-axis. So if we look here, obviously if we have 0 cartons, we have 0 muffins. If we have 1 carton, we'll have 3 muffins. 2 cartons, we'll have 6 muffins. 3 cartons, we'll have 9 muffins. 4 cartons, we'll have 12. And 5 cartons, we'll have 15. And it goes on from there. Now let's take a look at our additive relationships. Our additive relationships will include equations involving addition and subtraction. An additive relationship can be described by the equation y equals x plus b. Y represents the output, or the dependent variable. X represents the input, or the independent variable. B represents the constant. The b value will always remain the same in order to be considered an additive relationship. So let's take a look at this table. Again, we're going to look at the process. How can we get from x to y? Now remember, this is an additive relationship, so we're going to be looking at addition or subtraction. So take a minute to think. How can we get from x to y on this table? We should be able to get from x to y by adding 3. So to get from 0 to 3, we would do 0 plus 3. 3 plus 3 is 6. 4 plus 3 is 7. 5 plus 3 is 8. And 6 plus 3 is 9. So the equation for our table would be y equals x plus 3. So 0 plus 3, 3 plus 3, and so on. And that would get us our outputs. Let's take a look at another one. What is the process for this table? How do we get from x to y? We would get from x to y by adding 7. So 0 plus 7 would be 7, 2 plus 7, 9, 5 plus 7, 12, 9 plus 7, 16, and 10 plus 7 would get us 17. So our equation would be y equals x plus 7. So our x values plus 7 would get us to our output, or our y values. Now let's take a look at an example of an additive relationship. Mr. Mathman decided to give every student 10 bonus points on their test grades. So our equation would be y equals x plus 10. So x would stand for the grade before the bonus, y would stand for the grade after the bonus. Now the reason we're doing plus 10 is because he's giving every student 10 bonus points, so an additional 10 points on their test. So if we filled in this table, let's say that a student got a 0, which hopefully won't happen, but if they got a 0, they would get an automatic 10 after, because you would add 10 points. If they got a 25, they would get a 35. If they got a 70, they would get an 80. 85 would get a 95, and 90 would get 100. Notice all we did was add 10 points to the grade before the bonus. Now, if we looked at this in a table, 0 points, like we said, or I'm sorry, a grade before the bonus, a 0, would end up being a 10. We could look at, if we come right here, 25 would end up right here at a 35. A 70 would end up at an 80. An 85 would end up with a 95. And then a 90 would end up with 100. So today our learning target was I can summarize how additive and multiplicative relationships look in equations, tables, and graphs. Remember, additive equations have to do with both addition and subtraction. Multiplicative equations have to do with multiplication and division. Our independent variable is always our x value or the input, and it's always going to go at the bottom of the graph along the x-axis. Our dependent variable is the y or the output, and it always goes on the y-axis. On the tables, our independent's always going to be on the left, and our dependent's always going to be on the right. So x is on the left, y is on the right. Please make sure to practice, guys. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me. And don't forget, we do have our Zoom meetings every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 1 p.m.